Welcome back, podcast fans. I'm your host, Annette Hines, and this is Parenting Impossible, the Special Needs Survival Podcast. Happy New Year. I'm so excited that you're here. Thank you so much for listening this past year, and I am looking forward to another great year of this podcast. In September, this podcast turned 5 years old. I can't even believe it. If you know anything about podcasts, you know that most podcasts don't last that long. And our podcast has hit in the top 3% worldwide. That is phenomenal. Awesome, awesome, awesome. Despite that, we have not had the number of reviews that I expected. Now, I know it's a pain to go ahead and do a review, but if you could take a minute, if you've enjoyed listening to this podcast, if you find anything useful, helpful, inspiring, motivating, I would really appreciate it if you could take a minute to go ahead and rate 5 stars, please, and review this podcast. It helps get the information in front of people that really need it. Okay, that's my spiel for starting out the new year. I am doing a 3-part series. So the next 3 sessions, you're going to hear all about how to get 2025 off to a super phenomenal start. And we are going to talk about that in the context of the things that I know and the things that I do. And that is planning, planning with documents, planning with your finances, and planning your life. We are going to talk about that in the context of if you are taking care of someone else, if you happen to be a trustee, a guardian, a caregiver, we're going to have a session on that as well. So for the next 3 sessions, stay tuned and we will talk about how to get your year off to a phenomenal start. First and foremost, let's talk about keeping your estate plan up to date. Okay. Again, talking about what I know. So I get this question all the time. How often should I review and or update my plan? Partly that depends on you. Most of the time, your plan is not going to be impacted by law changes or outside forces. It's going to be impacted by what's going on in your own family, in your own financial situation. So you really know when you need to update your plan. However, in general, I would say doing a brief review every year at this time of year is an excellent, excellent habit to get into. Reviewing your finances and your estate plan, it doesn't have to be at the beginning of the year. It's just a time when everybody starts thinking about it because honestly, they start thinking about tax season and it's a good time to gather all this information. As far as, really taking a deep look at the documents and the financial plan, I would say at least every 3 years. If nothing's changed in your life that prompted it, you should take a deep dive at least every 3 years. So, as much as I've said that law changes typically are not going to impact you as much as your own personal changes, we've had some changes to laws in the last couple of years. We've had tax law changes with the Secure Act, and that impacts retirement benefits and special needs trusts and special needs planning. We've had some, pretty significant and, plus and minus law and regulation changes to public benefits, such as Social Security, Medicaid, and housing. So those are all things that need to be reviewed in the context of a disability or a special needs plan. So for those of you who haven't been here before, you will probably hear me using terms like special needs and disability somewhat interchangeably. Language is important, and I have a whole section on that if you go to the website or if you can head back to an earlier podcast where I talked about language. But just know that everybody chooses the words that they use to describe themselves and their situation differently. And while many adults who have disabilities are not fond of the term special needs, at the same time, many parents raising younger children are not fond of the term disabled. And then there are a smattering of other terms that people use as well. Don't get put off by the term special needs, please. It's a term of art in the law. A special needs trust and special needs planning comes directly from Social Security and other public benefits rules. So we can call it a disability trust, and that's okay. But generally speaking, when you are talking about Social Security benefits or Medicaid benefits, you're going to be talking about a special needs trust. Okay, there, I said that. Now, most people are concerned about keeping their estate plan up to date for changes in the law, as we've said. But I really want to talk to you about changes in your circumstances or even your goals, which are going to have a greater impact over time than law changes. Here are some things that could cause you to need to review your plan and see if it's still appropriate. If a beneficiary, an agent that you've named, like an agent under a power of attorney, a healthcare agent, an executor, or in our state, we call that a personal representative, or a person that you've nominated to be guardian or conservator for your minor or disabled child, either dies, becomes seriously disabled, or has some other concerning issues going on in their life, like perhaps they've gone through a bankruptcy, or they've started to have some issues of their own. I've had situations where someone has started to exhibit signs of mental illness, or has, developed a drinking problem or an issue with illegal substances. And therefore, they're not really a fit candidate for the role that you originally chose them to do. So that's one reason to take a deeper look at who you've nominated on your team. We call that our circle of care. Last session, I spoke about how to end the year strong. And one of the things that I asked you to do was to take a look at your team, your circle of care, and do a survey. So now that you've looked at your team, you can identify any of these potential issues that would set you up for a need to do some review and revisions potentially. Okay, now if you or your beneficiary or a person nominated as guardian for your minor or disabled child gets married, gets divorced, has more children, or adopts children, this could definitely change your goals and your circumstances, and would be a reason to do a deep dive review and possibly some revisions to your plan. If you move to another state, that is definitely a time to review your plan. This is a question I get all the time. Is this trust, is this document, is this estate plan going to be good in another state? If I move to Florida, if I move to Nebraska, if I move to Seattle? Well, that is a yes and no answer. There are some documents that are very state specific and that will be dependent on state law. Powers of attorney, healthcare proxies, guardianship nominations, those are all going to be very state specific. On the other hand, a revocable living trust may not be so much. Your special needs planning, so your third-party special needs trust, your D4A trust, which is a self-settled first-party trust, those documents are based on federal law. And for the most part, they are going to be okay. There are some state-specific nuances that may impact the way your public benefits agency in that state may review your trust. However, they don't necessarily need a major overhaul like some of your other documents. But if you do move or are planning on or thinking about or hoping to move to another state, it is time to take a good look, a deep dive review, and potentially revise your documents. Okay, now let's say that you become seriously disabled. You've had some health issues, your health is failing. Maybe you need more help during the day for basic needs like eating, bathing, dressing, toileting, or you're considering a move to a facility or, another living environment, which would provide more care for you. That is a definite time when you need to take a deep dive review at your plan. There may be planning opportunities here before you move, before you hit crisis, that you can take advantage of. That is definitely going to be state specific, but under most rules, it's a federal rule, you can transfer assets to a self-settled special needs trust called a D4A trust for the benefit of your disabled child, adult, minor child, doesn't matter. And that is a penalty-free transfer for Social Security and Medicaid purposes. And then you can qualify for public benefits yourself. It's a rare known tactic. If you are working with a qualified elder law or special needs attorney, they will know. But your general estate planner is not going to be familiar with this. So it's important if your health is starting to fail or if you're considering moving somewhere with more support, it's important to really take a look at what your future plan opportunities are in order to preserve assets for your disabled beneficiary. Okay, if you are married and your spouse passes, that is an excellent time to take a deep dive look at your plan and make sure that your goals are still the same. It's important to take a look at your net worth. Remember, in the last session, Ending the Year Strong, I asked you to gather all of your finances, gather all of your assets, and take a look at where your assets and liabilities are at the end of the year. And you should do that every year. Now that you have that list, take a look at your 2023 to 2024 list and see where your assets stand. Have you had a big change? Have they increased significantly, decreased significantly over time? What could make them increase? Well, think about this. A simple 7% growth rate means that your assets will double in value every 10 years without adding more to them. And 7% may seem high. It's low some years and high for other years. Most assets grow in value, even your real estate, even illiquid assets. And if you think about this, assets that are not subject to income taxes during your lifetime, such as a retirement account, like a 401k plan or an IRA, that 7% is not an after-tax growth rate. So what that means is you actually have an even bigger value than you were thinking. So if your net worth has increased or decreased significantly, it's a good idea to take a look at your plan and make sure that your beneficiary designations are what they should be, that you have capitalized well, that you know where your assets should be, that you take a look at your asset split amongst your beneficiaries. If you are spending significantly because you need more care at home, or you've had, some misfortune, you've had some significant healthcare costs, it's important to take a look at whether you've still allocated appropriately the assets amongst your beneficiaries. If you have dwindling assets, maybe your beneficiary who is disabled needs more of a percentage. Maybe it's time to take a look at some Medicaid planning and some preservation of assets. Life insurance. If your life insurance has changed, if you've let a policy lapse, or if it's lapsed because it was a 10-year policy and it's just expired, if you have purchased more life insurance or a significant amount of life insurance, it's a good time to take a look at your beneficiary designations and the allocation of that insurance product or policy within the context of your entire estate plan. Please remember that contract assets do not go in accordance with your trust or your will unless you have planned so, meaning that your beneficiary designation leaves the asset to your trust and then gets split from there. Very important to understand. Many people think that once they've created a will and or a trust, that they're all done, and forget that many of their assets are going to flow outside of that plan because they are contract assets, because they are joint assets, because they have different beneficiary designations than they intended. I recently had a situation where someone had not looked at their retirement plan since they were a young working adult, and since had been married, had kids, and the beneficiary on that plan was still their parents. It is nearly impossible to unwind that once you die. So it is really critical to know where all your assets are going to go when you pass. Okay, we talked a little bit about this, but I'm going to be a little bit more explicit. If your attitude changes about an agent that you've named, an executor, an agent under a power of attorney, a guardian, or even your beneficiaries, sad to say that many people become somewhat estranged from their children. I've had many cases like this. It's not anyone's fault. It's just what it is. And perhaps, it's time to rethink your plan. Or if your beneficiary has proven themselves to be more reliable, more able to manage their financial affairs, or less able to manage their financial affairs, perhaps you want to change the way you're looking at distributing assets to them, whether it's directly or being held for their benefit in a trust. Perhaps you're considering a divorce. Perhaps you're not feeling so great about your spouse making healthcare decisions for you. Perhaps your spouse or the beneficiaries that you've chosen, or these agents that you've picked, fiduciaries that you've picked, have changed their attitude about you. Time to think about taking a hard look at your plan, and do I need to make any revisions here? Okay, this is really important. Creditor issues. If creditor issues have arisen for you, or even more importantly, for your beneficiaries, and you anticipate maybe that your liability exposure may increase, let's say that you purchase property and you become a landlord, or you enter into a high liability profession, such as being a neurosurgeon or a bartender or a high school principal. You want to take a look at what you've done in your plan to protect your assets and your beneficiaries from your liabilities. But also, if you have a beneficiary that is starting to encounter some issues with credit, with maybe they've had a terrible accident in their car and they're being sued, there are things that you can do to protect assets now that you cannot do later. So it's important to talk about that with your planner. Okay, now a happy thing. If your minor child or minor beneficiary becomes an adult, or a young adult has grown into a genuinely mature adult, we sort of alluded to this a little bit earlier, then that's a good time to take a look at your plan. Perhaps it's time to give them more access. Perhaps it's time to have conversations with them about your plan. In our practice, we have started implementing the idea of a family meeting. Some people are loving it. Some people not so comfortable with it, but maybe it's time to talk about that and to let them in on the plan. If a parent or someone else not accounted for in your estate plan becomes dependent on you, we actually have a significant number of clients in our practice that are taking care of parents. That it's important to plan, even in the unlikely event that you predecease them and they need you. They need your assets and they need care. If you are providing care to them physically as well as financial support, it's quite possible that you are going to need to do something in your estate plan to make sure that that continues. Okay, last couple of things. If you want to acquire a business interest, a small business interest, not Coca-Cola, not something publicly traded, say that you retire from your first job and you've always wanted to open that little bakery or start a cafe, restaurant, become a real estate agent. Just many people really do have second careers and, passion projects that they're working on. If you have a primary business that has been your source of income and you sell it or you're looking to sell it, those are all times to take another look at your plan, to do a review and possibly revisions. If you want to buy real estate in another state, maybe it's finally time for you to buy that house in Maine or down the Cape. But you live in Rhode Island, but you're buying that Cape house in a different state. Or, you've always wanted that cottage in Colorado because you love to ski at Vail. Whatever it is, it's really important to take a look at your plan and see how that real estate is going to be held and cared for when you cannot. Those are generally, and they are not only and exclusively the list that you should be looking at, but those are generally the things that you should look at. And this is in conjunction with what I asked you to do for ending the year strong. Remember, looking at your documents, making sure you understand them, taking a good hard look at your team, and pulling together your end of year assets and understanding your beneficiary designations and your ownership of them. I hope this has helped. I look forward to talking to you again next week, and we're going to move on to the next phase of starting the year strong. Thank you. Thank you. Don't forget to review and rate this podcast, and I will talk to you soon. Happy New Year.